Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it's another literature review. And it is, once again, me jumping into the world of H.P. Lovecraft. I think it's been a while since I reviewed him, and since last time I've gotten a better book. You know, Tales of Horror is one of those ones you can get at Costco. Nice little one, has a decent amount of his stories in here. I know this is a little thing at the beginning in case anyone's wondering what's all in this one. We got Dagon, the Statement of Randolph Carter, Herbert West Reanimator, which I did read, by the way. It's not the one I'm reviewing today, but I have read it. If you've only seen the movie, a little bit different, but you can see what they adapted. Rats in the Wall, The Call of Cthulhu, Pickman's Model, The Dunwich Horror, Color Out of Space, and of course at the beginning, the topic of today's video, the very short story that Lovecraft wrote all the way back in his early period, and it was published in 1920 according to Wikipedia, and an episode of Tryout, and of course it's now in the public domain, The Cats of Ulthar. Now when I say that this is a short story, I really mean it is a short story. Alright, I'm going. See the whole book right here? These pages right here, that's the whole story. And it's only on the top page when it comes to this one. Before I get too far into the rest of the video, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the PayPal and Patreon links are down below. If you want to continuously support the channel, go the Patreon route. You'll be able to gain access to videos like this early, and you'll also be able to suggest the topics for future videos, like if there's any other short stories or books in here you want me to review, suggest it. If you just want to do one-off support or one-off request, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Now, when I reviewed Lovecraft in the past, I've mentioned that he is not the easiest read at times, because he can be adjective heavy to the point where you're like, what the hell is he trying to say, and have to break up the thesaurus if it's a word you don't know, and then reread once you have checked and be like, okay, that's what he's saying. And this varies from story to story. Some of the stuff he says in there has not aged the best due to it being a little racist. But of course, you got to take that with a note that that is how some people viewed others in his time period. I mean, some people still view that now, but we view them as more along the lines of that. Whereas back then, depending on where you were, it could be seen as the norm. The main thing I'll say bringing it up is it shows that even in the northeast where he lived, you could see that there were still people who had racist views, and it wasn't just, oh, the north of Bastion of Hope and everybody in the south racist. You find racist people in both places, and you find nice people in both places. Like I think I've mentioned a couple times, my great-grandmother lived in the south, not racist. Now, this short story, it's a lot easier to get through than his other ones because it's not as adjective heavy, and at least straight out compared to like some of this stuff like in Call of Cthulhu as an example. There's not as much stuff in there you could call racist. Now with part of the story there's a little bit of something you could kind of try to if you really want to, because it kind of is insinuating that those characters might be gypsies or Romani if you prefer me to not use that term. But that's one of those things that it's up to the individual reader to decide. Now, the synopsis of this story is that it's narrated by an unnamed narrator who is a citizen of the town of Ulther, or at least knows of it. You can decide. I go with it being someone who actually has resided there at least one point. Now, he begins to reminisce about a law in the town which forbids the killing of cats, and it gives the story why. Now, when you first hear that, you're like, why would anybody want to kill a cat? And I'm going to give you the first line of the story, and this is the line that really hooked me the first time I read it, because since it's so short, I have read it a couple times. It is said that in Ulther, which lies beyond the river Skye, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe as I gaze upon him who sitteth purring before the fire. So it's him looking at a purring cat that gets the story going. Some of the weirdest things to begin a narrative, but a cat, that's a good one. Now, in the town, there once lived an old man who was called a cotter and his wife, and they got off on trapping and violently killing any cats that ventured onto their property. Now, we all know in real life, especially in a modern setting, anytime that something like that would happen, you know there'd be people calling the police. But since this is a story written in the late teens, or maybe even the early part of 1920, before suburbia in the United States, when outside the city things were a lot more rural, especially compared to how things are now, you could see why someone would write something like this and they'd be able to get away with a little bit more. And just a little quick aside, the prose is written in a way where it's a little timeless, where like you could in your mind set it in any time period. But of course, when you look at when it was written, you'd probably think more of a like something from like a couple decades before, where it's a lot more rural, especially if you're going with a American setting instead of a European setting. Now, they kill these cats, and because of how this couple are, the people of the town are too afraid to speak against these acts. So basically, they treat it as an elephant in the room, be like, oh no, that's sad for that cat. And they focus their efforts on keeping their felines away from that cotter, because, you know, it's better to prevent the cats from going there and getting killed than having to do stuff after the fact. Now, one night, a caravan of travelers from a distant land arrived and they passed through the village. And they stay there for a little bit, you know, dealing with the villagers in other regards. Now, the way that they're described, and of course the fact they're a group of travelers, plus you factor in Lovecraft's things, that's why I think he's probably going with Romani here. Now, it could be he's also drawn on that archetype and just making him more generic because of the fact that this story is written in a way that it could be set anywhere other than, you know, the name drop of the river. And that's just a picture that came to me. Now, someone's probably going to say that's on you and not Lovecraft, but when it's written loosey-goosey like that, we're going to fill in the blank areas with stuff we already know. And that's the archetype that popped into my head with it. If you guys thought of a different archetype, I'd love to hear what you guys thought in the comments section below, but that's just what came up with me. Now, they have an orphan named Mins with them, who lost his family in the plague, and the only thing he has is this small black kitten. Nice little imagery there when you think about it, because the whole little stereotype about black cats being connected with witchcraft. Now, on the third day of their stay, this young orphan cannot find the cat. I think you already know what happened. Cat wandered too closely to the old cotter, and it was killed. Now he hears the stories about them, and he decides to take action. So he spends time meditating before unleashing a prayer that affects the shapes and movements of the clouds in the sky. Very ominous there. And not long after this, the caravan leaves Ulther in the middle of the night, and then the townspeople notice that the cats are missing, which is strange because they start to think, wait a minute, are they doing that? But the son of one of the villagers witnesses the felines circling the property of the cotter. Interesting. Because if any cats would approach it, usually be one, maybe two. But it wouldn't be like this. It's almost like the cats are being drawn to something or someone. Now, the next morning, the cats are all back in their places, and they appear to be well fed. But they don't hear anything from the cotter and his wife. Now, at first, they're like, they're probably just taking it easy and all that. Because obviously, these two people are disliked. So if they don't get seen by the villagers for a couple days, they're not going to bother with it. You know, it's like no skin off their nose. Now, after a while, this starts to get a little weird. So they explore the house, and they find two skeletons that have been picked clean of all biological matter. I think you can see what happened there. Now, of course, they all review the evidence, and they decide, with everything that went on, that they're going to pass a law that forbids the killing of cats within the city. Now, according to Wikipedia, this story is influenced by the works of the author Lord Dunsany, who, having not read, I cannot speak to how true that is, but Dunsany was an influential writer from his day. He passed away about almost 4 decades after this one was published, so he was still alive when Lovecraft wrote it. So if you can emulate people, emulate them while they're still alive, I guess you could say. Stuff he's written that Dunsany wrote would be like The King of Elfland's Daughter and The Gods of Peg Anna, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Dunsany's on the list of authors for me to read one of these days. I'm so backed up on everything, so it's going to take me forever to trudge through all the stuff. Now, I think it's pretty easy to see exactly what happened in the story. Men's decided to get revenge on the couple, so he unleashed some of the dark powers, channeled it through the cats. The cats went to the house. They attacked and killed the couple somehow. What you think about it, it's just cats, but if you think about it, you get enough cats, it would be possible, and then they ate them. Now, of course, when you think about it, that's probably the most realistic part of that. The whole thing of if you were to die in your house with pets around, after a while they could probably start eating your body. Cats probably a little bit sooner than dogs because of the whole loyalty with dogs. But it's one of those things, kind of paraphrase Carlin, they're going to be loyal, but after a couple days and them being hungry, they're going to be like, facts, screw you, you're dead. You're just a bunch of meat now. But here it's for revenge. And Lovecraft doesn't give an exact number of cats, but you can imagine a decent-sized village and a decent number of cats circling around a place and enough to be visible. That's a good amount of cats they're going to be killing. Now, men's, I mentioned the whole thing about him praying. I'm going to read verbatim what it says at that point in the story, and then give my thoughts on it. Let me find it. And when he learned these things, his sobbing gave place to meditation and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms toward the sun and prayed in a tongue no villager could understand. Though indeed the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the little boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous fingers of exotic things, of hybrid creatures crowning with horn-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. Now, based on that, and the fact that he channeled it through cats to avenge a black cat, I'm going to assume that he's channeling the eldritch forces that exist in Lovecraft's universe. Now, obviously not Cthulhu, because I think even a boy of his age would probably know probably not best to awaken Cthulhu just to revenge the death of a cat. Because even if Cthulhu, thankfully he's awoken, happened to take gaze on the boy, he'd be like, "You woke me up just to avenge the death of a cat. What is a cat anyway?" And that is, of course, if Cthulhu were to take notice. Because the thing in Lovecraft's world is the most dangerous thing about the fact that these cosmic deities exist is the fact that they have not noticed humans. We're just so small that we're like an ant to them. But if they happen to notice us... Now, the thing is, hybrid creatures crowned with horn-flanked discs. That sounds a little bit like... could be a description of some of his lesser things, whether it's some of his lesser deities or some of the other weird eldritch creatures that populate his universe. Now, this was written earlier in his cycle, so he might have had an idea of the stuff in the universe, the unknown creatures running around in his head. But how much of the stuff that would later come into his works and become known as the Cthulhu mythos Lovecraft had in his head, who knows? I'd have to do a little bit more research to find out that, and some of it we might not know other than conjecture. But when you connect all of it into one canon, you can see that that is what this boy Menz is channeling. Now, thankfully he does it correctly, because as I just mentioned, it could have gone horribly wrong other than what the cats did to those two. And of course, from the way the narrator was describing it, you could tell he's probably trying to describe it as a coincidence and an optical illusion. Maybe some type of illusion. Think about it. Such illusions to impress the imaginative. Impress the imaginative. Yeah, they basically tried to say that they're all naive and it was just an optical illusion. But it's one of those things, that, I didn't see that. I didn't see that. Kind of like Jack Torrance in The Shining when the things are moving behind him. I didn't see that. I didn't hear that. Trying not to see it, even though it's there. Which, of course, is why in the end they decided to pass that law about the cats, because even though they don't want to believe in all this hocus pocus, it still happens, so they got to do something to at least prevent it. And that's the reason they decide no one's going to be killing a cat in the town. Now, the prose is easy to get through. I mean, you heard some of it's a little poetic, but not as adjective heavy, so it's a little bit of an easier read, especially with how long it is. I can't really speak for the Dasani influence and how well that goes in there, but the imagery and the fact that you can set it at any time as you're reading it through your head does add to the enjoyment of the read. Now, this is one that I had not heard of, because when you break off the list of Lovecraft works, usually it's always the same few that they bring out in order to tell you to go read his stuff. Usually stuff like Call of Cthulhu, Shadow Out of Time, Dunwich Horror, and then if you go a little bit farther, Pigman's Model. I'm looking, maybe a little bit of the Rats in the Wall, Herbert West Reanimator, and of course At the Mountains of Madness, the story that Del Toro wanted to adapt but didn't because it would have seemed too close to Prometheus at the time. But this one is a pretty good one of his earlier ones. I really want to track down and read some of the other early ones just to get my thoughts on it. Now, I was originally going to do this one as a video essay, but decided, you know what, the rest of them were like that, and it's a short one, so I can afford to do it like this. Maybe one of these days I'll actually do a video essay related thing on it, finish that one, give more thoughts on that, but for now, here we go. As you can tell, it does get the Mar stamp of approval because it's not that long. It's easier to get through than some of his other ones. And if you want an idea of the imagery that Lovecraft can create with his prose without having to slog through it or get a thesaurus, it definitely is the one for you. Now, of course, I have it in this, but if you can find it online or find it in another collection and you want to give it a read, go for it. I don't know if there's like a short audiobook of it, but considering it's not that long, an audiobook probably wouldn't be that long. And maybe that would be a little interesting thing, do an audio narration of it. Who knows, maybe one day. Till next time, guys.